One of the ways in which Biden has really not in any way diverged from Trump is not only his Venezuela policy, but also his Iran policy. If you look at the Trump administration's foreign policy on Iran and Venezuela, it is basically identical to the Biden administration's, to the policies of the neoconservative Antony Blinken State Department. This is especially clear in regard to Iran. The US government, the Trump administration, unilaterally tore up the Iran nuclear deal, unilaterally, illegally, violating a UN Security Council resolution that the US itself had voted for. Meanwhile, there have been talks going on in Vienna, in Austria, to potentially come back to the Iran nuclear deal called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. But the Biden administration has taken this ridiculous hard line saying that they will not return to the deal unless Iran makes additional concessions, which is basically, that's the same exact policy of Trump. Trump's policy was that we're going to tear up the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, and we're going to force Iran to come to a new agreement. Of course, Iran refused to do that. The Biden administration is doing the same. It refuses to go back to the JCPOA unless the Iranian government agrees to new concessions, which means a new deal. I mean, maybe they wouldn't call it something new, but they want a new deal that is not the original language of the JCPOA. That is, there's no difference between Biden's and Trump's policy on Iran. The difference now is that the Western corporate media is acting as though Iran is the aggressor, as though Iran is the country that tore up the nuclear deal. Here is blatant fake news in the New York Times. This is a blatant lie in the New York Times. Quote, the Biden administration has said it wants to return to the original nuclear deal with Iran, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which former President Donald Trump abandoned in 2018, calling it the worst deal in history. This is a lie. As Left Eye on the news, Left Eye blog on Twitter, a great account points out, this is a blatant lie. The Biden administration has demanded an expansion to the JCPOA to restrict Iran even more. Expansion, also known as writing a new deal or editing, changing, revising the original plan. This is fake news. And again, there's no difference between the Biden and the Trump administration's policy on Iran. It's the same policy of a terrorist war, brutal sanctions that murder Iranian civilians and suffocate the economy, cyber attacks on Iranian civilian infrastructure, and then trying to force the country with this terrorist campaign and economic warfare to come to the negotiating table to agree to a new deal. It's the exact same policy under Biden. The difference is that instead of calling it a new deal, he just wants to call it a revised or expanded JCPOA. This is fake news in the New York Times. Fake news. But it's not the only time we've seen this fake news recently. I mean, we've constantly seen these Western corporate media outlets spread this ridiculous fake news. Here is AFP, one of the major Western media wires. This is what they say. This is December 3rd. The United States hit out at Iran, saying nuclear talks between the Islamic Republic and world powers had stalled because Tehran, quote, does not seem to be serious about returning to the table. No. First of all, this is ridiculous propaganda. They say world powers. No, this is not. The rest of the world is fine with the JCPOA. In fact, many of those world powers have continued abiding by the JCPOA. I want to remind listeners here that the JCPOA was signed by the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus 1. That is not just the United States, but also Britain, France, Russia, and China plus 1, which is Germany, and the European Union. All of those other powers are fine with the JCPOA and returning to the JCPOA. It is only the United States that is insistent on revising and changing the original deal while blaming Iran for supposedly not coming to the negotiating table, even though the U.S. is the one that is demanding new concessions unilaterally. I mean, this is insane propaganda. And I tweeted, The term gaslighting is very overused, but this is an actual example of gaslighting. This is imperial gaslighting. The US is the one that unilaterally tore up the deal and has imposed new conditions in order to return to the negotiating table. Iran has refused to agree to those conditions because no self-respecting country would do that after the other power, the US, is the one that tore up the deal unilaterally. And now the media is helping to facilitate this imperial gaslighting with fake news, claiming that Iran is not serious about returning to the deal. This is fake news. This is imperial gaslighting. It is the US that is not serious about returning to the Iran nuclear deal, and it is the Biden administration that is continuing Trump's policies.